Good morning, everyone. And welcome to the Center for Mindful Living. Uh, really grateful to be here to share in meditation practice with this wonderful community that comes together. And as you're joining and tuning in, um, just spending a few moments to um, really check in with yourself. You can begin that way, tuning in and just noticing what's alive for you as you come to your computer, you turn it on, and you're preparing yourself for meditation. Just doing an internal check-in at first here, just settling in and settling down a little bit. Expressing internally what's alive for you, or how are you showing up in this moment? Just this internal check-in. And if you wish, you can drop a few words in the chat just to let me know how you are arriving, and the rest of the community, the sangha, if you wish. I'm just noting that we all come to meditation practice for a whole myriad of reasons. Yet we can sit together and share our experiences like this. It's a beautiful thing. And I always think back to the Buddha, the Buddhist teachings, and how the Buddha not only taught us how to meditate, some of the tools for meditation, but also how to live in a way that recognizes and reduces suffering. The Four Noble Truths. And recognizing suffering in its various forms through insight, our mindfulness practice, and also compassion. And noting whatever has the nature to arise shall also pass away. So as we begin to notice this when we practice mindfulness of the body and the mind, we can see our body sensations and thoughts as impermanent, always changing. We can also cultivate, purposefully so, loving kindness and compassion through the heart practices. Really tuning into this natural inclination of a loving heart is to feel compassion not only for ourselves, but for all other beings. And as ecologist and Buddhist teacher that many of us know, Joanna Macy, when she was teaching, she said, I love this quote, "The heart that breaks open can hold the whole universe." So that's pointing to that we're connecting with something greater than ourselves. And in Buddhism, there are three jewels: the Buddha, the Dharma, the teachings, and the Sangha. The Sangha, or community of practice, has the capacity to hold our joys and our sorrows. It may be imperfect at times, yet it can also help us wake up as we touch into our interbeing, our interconnectedness. And we can ask ourselves questions like, how would it be if we approached our suffering, like anger or delusion, as a friend or a teacher. And that's what we'll be exploring today. And that also reminds us that we can lean into the suffering rather than pushing away. We can learn. We can hold these moments with more kindness, if you will, loving kindness, metta, and other resources. So I'm just going to take a quick look at the chat to see how people are arriving with gratitude, with curiosity, slightly revved up. And wanting to quiet busy mind. All right. So let's practice. If you haven't already, finding a comfortable position or posture for approximately a 30-minute meditation practice. And if you're seated, find a position where you can find or strike a balance between being upright and relaxed. Spending a few moments with your posture, maybe moving a little back and forth or side to side, finding a position seated on your sits bones with the spine upright as best as you can. Just envisioning the head balancing on top of the spine, ears over shoulders, the chin slightly tucked back for this alignment. And allowing your eyes to soften away from the screens. Your hands can be resting in your lap, palm over palm. Finding your breath. Relaxing into any tight areas of tension in the body. Body scan from head to toe, just noticing any of the areas that may need a little bit more attention as you settle in, settle down. Building a little bit more space around any areas of tension or pain. Can you relax around it? And in this practice, we're going to try our best to let go of any doing. And open our hearts and minds to receiving, to being, just in this moment, in this body, this mind, just as it is. Taking a few deep in breaths and out breath. maybe even an audible sigh to allow your body to relax more into this moment. Arriving, arriving. Nowhere else to be. Nothing else to do. I'm grateful for this time to be together. 30 of us just sitting in sangha community. It's a beautiful thing. I'm grateful for this body just sitting alive right now. We can be mindful of our aliveness. Bringing our focus, our attention to our body breathing. Naturally on its own. What a miracle. Breathing in, I dwell in the present moment. And breathing out, I feel it's a wonderful moment. Breathing in, I dwell in the present moment. Breathing out, I feel it's a wonderful moment. Just noticing how these phrases resonate. And knowing that wherever your mind, thoughts, feelings, emotions take you, you can always return to this breathing in and out. This present moment awareness. receiving and allowing. Allowing your thoughts, your ideas, your thinking mind, your monkey mind to be in the background of feeling your body, breathing. And being mindful of this in the foreground. Thoughts and feelings in the background. How intimate can you be with one breath? Aware, awake of the in-breath, the out-breath. Knowing it experientially. Can you bring your attention in and down into your belly? Noticing the belly breathing, rising and falling. As your mind becomes more focused, you have an option to stay with the body and the breath for the whole meditation in a very relaxed way, staying present with each in-breath and out-breath. If you feel settled enough, you can open the space of awareness to be more mindful of the thoughts, feelings, sounds, other sensations that may appear in this moment. And just noticing the thoughts that pull you away. Being aware of them without identifying with the thoughts. Just noting, thinking. The same with feelings. Taking a backward step to just notice. Being mindful of them as they happen on their own. Relaxing into the space of awareness without attachment, without judgment. Even relaxing with feeling unrelaxed. Being aware of each moment and awake to each moment in life. And taking refuge in this awareness. To be intimate is to feel the silence, the space that everything is happening in. Just noticing. This is building our resilience to whatever arises. With curiosity, without judgment, as best as we can. How would it be if you approached your own suffering, things not going your way, as a friend or a teacher? How would it be if you leaned into suffering with kindness, with compassion for yourself and for others? The natural inclination of a loving heart is to feel compassion for ourselves and all other beings. The heart that breaks open can hold the whole universe. Holding all our joys and our sorrows. And in the closing moments of our practice this morning, we can gather the merit of our practice, our formal meditation, and offer well wishes to all those who are suffering in our lives, in the world. Opening our hearts, radiating kindness, compassion, well wishes. All beings are my family. May all beings be free from inner and outer harm. May all beings be safe. May all beings be protected. And may all beings experience freedom and joy. All beings without exception. And deep bow to all of you for showing up today, for being here, sharing your practice. Thank you so much. A deep bow of gratitude. So today, the talk is on working with emotions like anger and delusions so that we can act with more compassion to help reduce suffering in our own lives and in the world. No small task. And so, as I mentioned, I came to this this topic just from sitting in sangha and listening, and it's also not an abstract question for me personally. And so, like many of us, I'm practicing in a time of deep personal, social, ecological pain, suffering. But I'm also practicing in the middle of my own professional life that asks me to really listen closely to workers, to communities, organizers, and people who are asking institutions with power to be more accountable for the harm they're causing in the world, be it through corporate practices or government policies. So the question that I'm holding is this, and I'll share it with you now. How do we stay awake to suffering without being consumed by it? How do we allow anger to transform into courage rather than hatred? How do we see through delusion without hardening into certainty? And then how do we act from compassion without becoming passive or overwhelmed? So those are several questions that I'm holding and sharing with you now, just for your own reflection. So beginning with the feelings or emotions of anger. Anger as information, I should say, not as identity. I think, as we all know in our lives, that anger is a very common human emotion. In Buddhist practice, anger is often named as one of the difficult mind states that can cause suffering. But that doesn't mean that we feel judgment or shame for ourselves when we feel anger. But we do notice it. And when we name it, we may better notice when it arises, underlying causes and conditions. And we may notice that anger arises when something harmful happens to something that we love. It may arise when we witness cruelty, exploitation, abuse, or indifference. And it may also arise when our own personal boundaries are being crossed. And so when we begin to notice how and when anger arises in our lives, we can also notice that something really matters here. Something might need protection. Something might need to change. So the practice really is not to suppress anger, but also it's not to allow it to take over our whole life, our whole mental house of the mind, but to try to meet anger with steadiness or equanimity so that we can listen to the wisdom inside it without becoming possessed by it. So I have an example from my own life. Just last week, I attended a corporate accountability roundtable where communities and workers described how they're organizing and fighting back against various corporate abuses to help realize social and environmental justice, like within their own communities, in their own backyard. And there was this one specific example from a farmer, a rancher in Mexico. And he was describing how his community along the Sonora River is still fighting for justice more than a decade after a terrible copper mine disaster when a pipe blew and released enough toxic acid waste to fill 16 Olympic swimming pools. And this spread through the river to dozens of towns, affecting more than 25,000 people and leaving residents with immediate illnesses, headaches, rashes, peeling skin. And this was their water source that was polluted. And today, like I said, over 10 years after this toxic spill, the communities along the river are still continuing to demand accountability, clean water, health care, remedy from this company, Grupo Mexico, the fourth largest conglomerate in Mexico. They've done research. They're tracking the number of cancer cases as they rise, and testing that shows heavy metals persist not only in the water, but the soil, the air, and the blood of many people still living in the spill's path. One community member, I was just reading about this online as well after listening to this rancher, this farmer, and she said about the company that they're just waiting for us all to die from cancer. And listening to this story and sharing it with you, like I can still feel like the anger arise in my body. And it's not abstract. It's a very human response to hearing about the harm that should not have happened. And alongside the anger, I also feel this tenderness and admiration, along with grief and respect for the people closest to the harm, who are also showing a tremendous amount of courage. And I'm sharing this example because I think this is a good place to point that this is where practice begins. Not by saying that our anger shouldn't be there, but by asking, what else is here? What love is inside this anger? What pain is underneath it? And what actions could actually reduce some of this suffering? So I'll just repeat that, like thinking of that story, that scenario, which is unfortunately too common all around the world. What else is here? What love is inside this anger? What pain is underneath it? What actions would help reduce suffering? And bringing in Buddhist meditation teacher Sharon Salzberg, she often teaches that compassion is not weakness or avoidance. One line of hers that has stayed with many people is, compassion doesn't mean we don't fight. It means we don't hate. And that's a very useful teaching for this moment. It says that we can take a stand. We can say no to harm. We can protect communities. But we don't have to let hatred become the ground from which we act. And the other theme I want to bring into this topic is delusion as misperception and separation. And this mind state in Buddhist language of delusion is simply, it's not a lack of information. It's a misperception. It's the mind's habit of making a partial view feel complete. Delusion says, I know exactly who I am. I know exactly who you are. I know who is good. I know who is bad. I know who is beyond care. I know the whole story. Okay, that's delusion. In Zen practice, we are constantly invited to soften that certainty around believing we know exactly how things are. But this doesn't mean we abandon moral clarity. It doesn't mean we pretend harm is not a harm. But it doesn't mean those things, but it does mean we let go of mental states that believe our first view is the whole view. And here I want to bring in Anu Gupta's work on breaking bias. And he talks about how bias is one modern language for delusion. It's a conditioned making quick conclusions about people, often below the level of conscious thought. And through his teachings on breaking bias, he points us back to practices such as mindfulness, stereotype replacement, and perspective taking. And these are ways of interrupting an automatic mind and returning to a fuller view of seeing. Because delusion narrows the heart. And practice widens the field of view. Like in the meditation today, we focused on some heart practices of loving kindness, of metta, of compassion, really as counters to this misperception of delusion and separation, to this concept of our interbeing, our interconnectedness. So to continue with my example of corporate harm, I wanted to also say how it can be tempting to flatten the world into heroes and villains. And yet, if we're serious about reducing suffering, we have to see both clearly and systematically. We can still name the harm. We name the harm. We can support accountability. We can stand with workers and communities to demand environmental justice and social justice. And we can also see the systems, as Joanna Macy really instructed us to do. See the systems, the incentives, the fear, the greed, the confusion that allows harm to continue. It's a demanding practice to take that backward step, asking us to remain morally awake without becoming overly self-righteous. It asks us to care fiercely without dehumanizing. It asks us to act from a bodhisattva heart, not from the part of us that wants an enemy to carry all the pain. So in my example, it does allow space to open up, to work with those who have caused harm, to develop new systems of accountability, perhaps through laws and regulations, enforcement. Really an engaged practice of compassion, moving from an inner practice that we cultivate in our sangha to action in the world. And building in pauses, not passivity, but a pause where wisdom has a chance to enter, where anger can be joined by compassion, by humility, and skillful means, referencing the Eightfold Path, acting skillfully. So the point of practice is not to become a calm person in a private bubble while the world is on fire. The point of practice is to become steady enough, honest enough, and undefended enough to help reduce suffering. And this is where I find the bodhisattva vow, or in more secular language, our deep intention so important. In the Zen tradition, which I practice, vow is not just a promise we make with the conscious mind. It is a direction we return to again and again, a deeper orientation of a life. And for me, that deep intention is connected to service, to worker dignity, to human rights, and the possibility of building systems where people, everyday people, have a voice, and where accountability for the most powerful becomes real. Your words may be different, but each of us can ask, what is the deep intention I want to return to when I'm angry, when I'm afraid, when I'm confused? The Zen peacemakers offer 3 simple tenets that are helpful here: not knowing, bearing witness, and compassionate action. The not knowing asks us to release fixed ideas, delusions, if you will. And bearing witness asks us to stay present to the suffering and joy, all the myriad things. Bearing witness. And the compassionate action is the action that arises from that presence, that open-hearted bearing witness. This is also the heart of engaged compassion, where it's not about avoiding conflict per se, but a willingness to be touched by suffering and to respond in ways that reduce harm. I'll repeat that. Compassion is the willingness to be touched by suffering and to respond in ways that reduce harm to the best of our abilities. I always add that refrain, the best that we can. And so when workers and communities are organizing, they're not only resisting harm, they're also representing and expressing their dignity. They're insisting that their lives, their land, their bodies, their labor, and their futures matter. They matter. And they're showing us that compassion can take the form of testimony, organizing, accountability. Here in Washington, we may see that as policy or legal changes, remedies, and also what I think we are witnessing across our nation is collective courage. Collective courage. Yeah, last week was a busy week for me. I also had the opportunity to go to a screening of a film called, let me try to get this right, Before You Eat. I'll have to double check that. So before this screening, it was at American Law School. It was on forced labor in distant water fishing on the high seas. And I had the real privilege of meeting with courageous leaders connected to this union of Indonesian migrant workers. These are workers who are often working as crew aboard distant water fishing fleets on the high seas. And some had survived egregious conditions of forced labor. aboard these vessels. There's no labor inspection on the high sea. So this film included footage captured by crew on their mobile phones. And to witness that kind of truth-telling is to understand that reducing suffering requires more than concern. It requires listening to workers, this bearing witness, believing what they are risking to tell us, and then helping build systems that make remedy and prevention real. And they were showing us footage of a crew member, a friend of theirs, who died on board the vessel of beriberi, which is prevented by having adequate food and vitamins, which they did not have aboard these vessels. And because of this issue called transshipment, they're forced to stay out sometimes on these vessels for months, even upwards of a year or longer without touching land. It's unbelievable to think, given the seafood industry is a billion-dollar industry, billion-dollar profit-making industry. Those catching the fish are really paying the price. And so just witnessing their struggles is why these feelings of like outrage and anger, when practiced with, can become courage. Grief can become tenderness. Delusion can become humility. And then compassion can become anger. Action. It's a practice. It's a practice, not perfection. And so I wanted to just close with talking about how anger can be joined with wisdom. And meeting our anger with honesty and care, seeing through delusion and humility, acting with courage and compassion, and actions that reduce suffering, that don't add to it. So the world does not need us to be free from anger before we act. It needs us to refrain as best as we can from letting anger alone act. In this practice, mindfulness and wisdom and compassion helps us bring anger into relationship with patience and humility and love. And in Zen, we often return to what is right in front of us. This breath, this body, this person, this moment, this suffering, this responsibility, and not as a burden that we carry alone, but as a field of practice that we can meet together. So as we move about in the world, the rest of this day, this week, this month, may we practice and learn to transform our anger into courage. May we transform delusion into clear seeing. May we transform compassion into action. And may whatever steadiness and insight we cultivate be offered for the benefit of all beings, especially those facing harm, exploitation, exclusion, and fear. Thank you so much for your practice and for your attention. Deep bow gratitude.